So what I'm about to present to you all is a 10-minute speech that I prepared last year for my competitive speech and debate season. And it was one of the only speeches that I never got bored with. So I hope you all like it. In 1947, the communists took power in Poland. Italy signed a treaty with the Allies, officially ending World War II. The communists took power in Poland, Jackie Robinson started playing with the Dodgers, and the Cold War officially began. And on September 22nd in Louisiana, a girl was born. Her life and her story would change the world. And then she would attempt to do the unthinkable. Change it back. Norma McCorvey was born Norma Leah Nelson. Norma's childhood was relatively ordinary, so our story picks up when she was 14 years old. This is when her father left her with her alcoholic and abusive mother, and Norma's life took a downturn. Her mother was physically and emotionally abusive, slapping her and calling her an idiot. And this is what drove Norma at only 14 years old to drugs and alcohol. At 15, she dropped out of high school. 1 year later, at just 16, she'd married Woody McCorvey, whom she'd known for only 6 weeks, and she was his third wife. 1 year into their marriage, she became pregnant, and upon telling her husband, he began beating her. Scared with nowhere to go, she ran back to the only place she had, which was with her still abusive mother, and it was there that she gave birth to a baby girl, which against her wishes was taken custody of by her mom. Norma felt betrayed and bolted, drifting from town to town, job to job. She gave birth to another child, which she gave to its father, and finally found herself at 23 years old, working at a circus in Dallas, Texas, and pregnant for the 3rd time. It was with this pregnancy that she asked her doctor for an abortion, and was shocked to find that they were illegal in the state of Texas. She was directed to 2 lawyers, Linda Coffey and Sarah Weddington. And this is when the world changed. The year was 1970. Norma McCorvey was 23 years old, and she had just been dubbed Jane Roe. Roe v. Wade is one of the most significant court cases in our country's history, and after its decision, Jane Roe became this anonymous figurehead for pro-choice and abortion advocates everywhere. She was their brave woman who had fought in the Supreme Court for her rights. Only that's not what happened. Not at all. In Norma's autobiography, I Am Roe, she tells the true story of the events that took place. How she never even saw the inside of a courtroom. Her lawyers took over, and after getting her written testimony, after only 6 months, they dropped out of her life. Yet it took 3 years for Roe v. Wade to come to an end. In a 1989 interview, Norma describes how she found out that the decision had been made. When coming home from her job cleaning houses, she picked up a newspaper and saw that the decision had been made in her favor. The child she'd wanted to abort, the baby that had started it all, had just turned 2. She'd given it up for adoption without even knowing its gender. Norma wrote that when she found out the case had been decided in her favor, she looked into a mirror and asked herself, "What have I done?" It was then that her life descended into a deep depression. Drug use, alcoholism, and the lesbian lifestyle are what defined her. She tried unsuccessfully to commit suicide and continued to cut herself. Yet it wasn't until 1985 that she came out to the world and revealed who she was and what her part in the passing of this law had been. And it was only then that she started working in an abortion clinic. Norma wrote, "I could outcuss the crassest of men and women. I could outdrink most of the Dallas Tavern regulars. When pro-lifers called me a child killer, I called them worse. When protesters held up signs of aborted fetuses, I spit in their face. I had a reputation to uphold, after all. As the plaintiff in the infamous Supreme Court case Roe v. Wade, my life was inextricably tied up with abortion." At At the clinic, it was Norma's job to talk to the women and distract them when an abortion was being performed. But it wasn't until her second book, Won by Love, that she describes what actual work in an abortion clinic was like. When a later term abortion was performed, the doctors had to piece the baby back together to make sure that all parts were accounted for. They had to find one head, one torso, 2 arms, and 2 legs. A common joke we had at the clinic was, if you want to humble a doctor, hide a leg so he thinks he has to go back in. Yet despite outward appearances, Norma was not always the poster child the abortion industry wanted her to be. There were 2 things she absolutely refused to do. She would not do the job of piecing aborted fetuses back together, and she refused to take plastic bags full of what those doctors called tissue into storage. This was a place she dubbed the parts room. It was never cleaned and housed one large white freezer that was full of those plastic bags. The one time she went in there, she vomited. Norma wrote, "When you work at an abortion clinic, you're guilty and you know it. For all of the millions of dollars spent on public relations, the abortion industry has yet to invent rhetoric powerful enough to blind its own workers from the truth. We see the aborted fetuses, we hear the women's cries, and we cannot keep lying to ourselves." It was then that the fiery pro-life group Operation Rescue moved in next door, and one of the most drastic conversions was started. You see, Norma expected these pro-lifers to treat her the way that she treated them. But they didn't yell at her. They didn't spit in her face. They talked to her. They took her out to lunch. They developed a relationship with her. And it was only after that relationship had been established that she breached the topic that was always the elephant in the room. But she did it gently, lovingly, and kindly. Yet even then, it took a small girl's love to truly change Norma's heart. Emily was only 8 years old, daughter of Operation Rescue worker Rhonda, and she completely befriended Norma, hugging her whenever they saw each other, and repeatedly inviting her to church. Norma wrote, "While the Operation Rescue workers targeted my mind, Emily went straight for the heart. And after a while, Emily began to personify the issue of abortion, especially after her mother broke down and told me that Emily had almost been aborted." It was then that Norma accepted this little girl's invitation to church, and at her first service, the pastor looked out at the congregation and asked who was tired of living a sinner's life. And Norma realized she was tired of having death define her, and tired of being involved in something that was so destructive. Yet she continued to support abortion only in the first trimester, till one day, sitting in a doctor's office, she saw a poster depicting fetal development. Something in that poster made me catch my breath. I kept seeing the picture of that tiny 10-week-old embryo and thought to myself, that's a baby. It's as if the blinders just fell off, and I realized that that's a child. It was not long after this that Norma became a member of the Catholic Church. On July 5th, 2005, a woman stood up and addressed the Senate Judiciary Committee for something that was almost unheard of. A plaintiff was seeking to overturn a case that had been ruled in her favor. And this is only part of what she said. "I am the woman once known as Jane Roe of Roe v. Wade, but I detest the name Jane Roe and all it stands for. I'm a real person. My name is Norma McCorvey, and I stand before you today to bear witness to all the atrocities that have come from this decision. I never got the opportunity to speak in my own court case. My lawyers were looking for a pregnant white plaintiff to use as a guinea pig in this great new social experiment, and they found it in me. But what this decision has done has removed all protection for women and the unborn against the atrocities committed by these abortion doctors. the women hurt by abortion have formed a movement they call Operation Outcry. To cry out to you, to the courts, and to God Almighty to end this scourge of abortion on our nation. The Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. helped lead our country non-violently to end the scourge of segregation. When slavery was legal, we treated one class of human beings as property. We are treating the unborn in a mother's womb as less than human when we say it is okay to kill them. How can we have life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness when we have death by abortion? I urge you to do everything in your power to overturn Roe v. Wade. Norma's plea was tossed out of court. But she has not given up, not by a long shot. Her website, dubbed Roe No More, is dedicated to educating people about the real person whose story was so central to a decision that changed our country and ended more than 50 million lives. Because you see, Jane Roe is Norma McCorvey. But Norma McCorvey is no longer Jane Roe. Thank you.